Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump would like us to believe they discovered an island, like Christopher Columbus stumbling across the Americas. A mysterious Mediterranean paradise floating patiently in the sea, waiting centuries for Ivanka Trump to arrive and find it. One almost expects her to say, "We planted a flag, claimed it for the House of Trump, and introduced civilization to the natives." The only problem is that Sazan is not an undiscovered island. It is part of Albania. It belongs to a country. It belongs to a people. It has a history. But listening to Ivanka tell the story, you get the impression that Albania itself is little more than scenery, a backdrop, a prop, a stage set in the ongoing reality show of billionaire self-discovery. And there's something revealing about that, not merely the naivety, the entitlement, the assumption that the world exists as a collection of assets waiting to be admired, acquired, developed, monetized, and transformed into luxury experiences for the rich. Ivanka described how they found the island. They were on a friend's yacht. They stopped for a swim. They swam ashore. They went for a hike, barefoot. Oh, how innocent, how simple and grounded. There's something almost Marie Antoinette-like about the performance. Millions of Americans are struggling to pay rent, struggling with grocery bills, struggling with health care, struggling simply to stay afloat. Meanwhile, the daughter of a president who claims to champion ordinary people is recounting her magical journey of self-discovery aboard a millionaire's boat in the Mediterranean. One can almost hear the echoes of Versailles, not because she literally said, "Let them eat cake," but because the same detachment lingers beneath the story, the same insulation, the same inability to distinguish privilege from reality. In this world, extravagance becomes authenticity, acquisition becomes adventure, and a billion-dollar property deal becomes a spiritual awakening. This act is not new. It's one of the oldest acts in history. For centuries, colonial power spoke of virgin land, empty land, untouched land, land waiting to be claimed. The people already living there were treated as background scenery, obstacles, inconveniences. Today's conquistadors arrive dressed differently. They don't carry muskets, they carry investment portfolios. They don't speak of conquest, they speak of development. They don't speak of empire, they speak of opportunity. And before Sazan, there was Gaza. Long before luxurious villas were being imagined on an Albanian island, Jared Kushner was publicly discussing the waterfront potential of Gaza. Bombs were falling, neighborhoods were being erased, families were being buried beneath rubble, children pulled from collapsed buildings. And Kushner? He was salivating about real estate, waterfront potential, prime coastal property, opportunity, the vocabulary used whenever powerful people stop seeing human beings and start seeing assets, the vocabulary that transforms suffering into a business plan. And that brings us back to Sazan, because Sazan is not merely a picturesque island. It sits at a strategic crossroads between the Adriatic and the Mediterranean seas. It contains military infrastructure, tunnels, fortifications. Its significance extends far beyond tourism brochures and luxury villas. Yet strategic questions are curiously absent from the glossy presentations. Instead, a blonde heiress is placed in front of the cameras to talk about lifestyle, wellness, sustainability, reflection, personal journeys, and other expensive nonsense, the modern jargon of elite acquisition. But Kushner's story doesn't begin in Albania, nor can it be understood without context. His family has long been among the major financial supporters of Israeli settlement organizations. Family foundations donated to projects built on occupied Palestinian land. They donated to the Israeli military. Kushner cultivated exceptionally close ties to Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli far right. He became one of the principal architects of policies that overwhelmingly favored Israeli territorial ambitions. These are not random biographical details. They are the context, because they reveal a worldview in which land is something to be rearranged by those powerful enough to rearrange it. If money works, use money. If money fails, use politics. If politics fail, use pressure. If pressure fails, use force. The mechanism changes, the objective remains: control. The parallels become even more striking when one looks at how Kushner says he first encountered Sazan. It began aboard a yacht. Of course it did. In 2021, Kushner visited Sazan while sailing on a yacht owned by Nath Rothschild. There, on that yacht, he met Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama, and discussions about the island's future began. A billionaire, a baron, and a prime minister on a yacht, discussing the future of somebody else's land. If that sounds less like democracy and more like the 19th century, that is because it does. The informality is the point. These conversations are not meant to happen in public squares or parliaments. They happen behind closed doors, far away from the people whose lives they affect. And Nat Rothschild is not merely a wealthy financier who happens to possess a famous surname. He is the fifth Baron in the Rothschild dynasty. His family name occupies a unique place in modern political history. More than a century ago, another Rothschild, Lionel Walter Rothschild, the second Baron Rothschild, received another famous document, the Balfour Declaration, a letter that promised away Palestine without consulting the Palestinians. A century separates the two Rothschilds, but the symbolism is difficult to ignore. One moment involved a letter helping determine the future of Palestine. The other involved discussions helping determine the future of a strategically significant Albanian island. Different times, different places, different circumstances, yet the underlying pattern feels strangely familiar. Powerful men discussing the future of other people's land, far away from the people who actually live on it. Palestinians have long viewed the Balfour Declaration as a quintessential colonial act. Powerful men deciding the fate of another people's homeland without their knowledge or consent. Many Albanians fear Sazan is being treated in much the same fashion, not through military conquest, but through money, influence, political access, and elite relationships operating beyond democratic scrutiny. Those fears are not entirely imaginary. Anti-corruption prosecutors in Albania are currently investigating changes made to laws governing development on environmentally protected land. Under the terms of that strategic investor agreement, Kushner's company will pay no taxes for 10 years during construction. Albania's treasury will not see a single leke of it for the better part of a generation. A sovereign nation, in other words, changed its environmental laws, waived a decade of tax revenue, and handed a strategically significant island to a foreign billionaire. In exchange for what precisely? Nor is this the first time Kushner has attempted this model. He previously planned to develop a Trump-branded property in Belgrade, Serbia. In December 2025, he withdrew from the project after 4 high-ranking Serbian government officials were charged with abuse of power and forgery in connection with it. Shortly afterwards, affinity partners withdrew. Incidentally, Jared Kushner is often portrayed as a visionary entrepreneur risking his own fortune. The reality is rather different. Affinity Partners was launched with roughly $2 billion from Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund. Additional investments later came from the UAE and Qatar. And he's not the only one making billions from political access. Since the Trump family's return to power, the broader Trump-linked investment network has expanded with astonishing speed. According to the Financial Times, 1789 Capital, a venture firm whose partners include Donald Trump Jr., saw its assets surge from around $200 million to $3.5 billion in little more than a year. Political power turned into personal private capital, making billionaires out of millionaires. Sazan is not an anomaly. It is a case study. During a visit to the Knesset, Albania's Prime Minister Edi Rama spoke of Benjamin Netanyahu in terms that sounded less like diplomacy and more like devotion. He told Netanyahu that his legs were shaking in the presence of one of the world's greatest orators. It was a remarkable spectacle. Head of government lavishing praise upon a man presiding over a military campaign that much of the world has described as genocidal. When criticism erupted over the Sazan project, how did Rama respond? The protests, he claimed, were part of a hybrid war against Albania and Israel. So citizens asking questions about their own coastline become enemies of Albania and Israel suddenly fused together. Yet the protests have only grown. Night after night, thousands have gathered in Tirana, students, activists, environmentalists, ordinary citizens declaring that their country is not for sale, because what Albanians are protesting is not simply a resort, but a system in which billionaires connected to Trump and Netanyahu, backed by Gulf sovereign wealth and facilitated by compliant governments, move across borders, acquiring land, influence and power. Gaza, Serbia, Albania, the geography changes, the logic remains. But so increasingly does the pushback, the resistance, people refusing to be treated as invisible, as irrelevant, as obstacles standing in the way of somebody else's grand ambitions. What's being exposed here is not an undiscovered island. It is the extraordinary arrogance of those who believe the world belongs to them, and the growing number of people determined to prove that it does not.